Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around finding and defining purpose in the world. I'm your host, Florence Adu. I'm coming to you from Accra this week. It's still so hot, but I'm loving it. At least I can't complain. And in my typical endless summer lifestyle, I am preparing for my summer sojourn back to the US. And I hear the weather's quite nice in New York. So I'm looking forward to that. And likewise, I am looking forward to my conversation with my guest for today, who is an entrepreneur in the public interest. He spent the last few years as the CEO of Flutterwave, a business building payments, technology, and infrastructure connecting Africa to the global economy. He led the company to become one of the fastest growing payments technology businesses of all time, processing over $2 billion across over 50 million transactions. A serious techpreneur, prior to Flutterwave, he co-founded Andela, which is Africa's largest engineering organization with over 1,000 software engineers. Andela's investors include Mark Zuckerberg and Google Ventures, among others. He now leads the Fund for Africa's Future, where he spends time helping founders, philanthropists, and investors from around the world understand how to build fast-growing and impactful technology businesses in Africa. Iyinoluwa Aboyeji.
Yeah, that's very good.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Wow, I'm so happy to have you here.
Yeah.
So let's get started. Let's get right in. Please tell us more about where you're from, where you're local, and what is your craft?
Okay, I don't know how granular you want me to get with that, but basically I'm from Nigeria, and thankfully I'm local here in Nigeria.
Okay.
Just to give you a sense of where I grew up. I was born here in Lagos, not very far from where I'm seated right now in Yaba, where my offices are. But, my family is actually from the north central in Kwara. We're a bit of a lost tribe of Lagos.
Okay.
We're Yoruba, but we're from the Ilorin Emirates. So it's an interesting mix. But my grandfather, apparently the law says, walked over to Lagos, and we settled here 3 generations now. My grandfather, my father, and now myself. So that's where I'm local now.
Okay. And what would you describe as your craft?
That's an interesting question. I would say what I'm really, really good at, which is what I imagine it means to have a craft, is building businesses that make tons of money and tons of impact. And that's the 0 to 1 stages of that. You identify an incredible problem. You basically, with far more courage than smarts, attempt to solve it. And then ultimately you make it an attractive opportunity for others to follow, to attempt to do the same thing. And I've been lucky enough to do that in the education space with Andela, the education to employment, as we like to call it, space. And then I did again with the fintech and payment space with Flutterwave. And now trying to do it again with investment space with Future Africa. But ultimately the goals are the same. It's really just identifying a challenge, identifying solutions to that challenge, market-driven solutions to that challenge, and deploying those solutions for meaning and for profit.
What do you think prepared you to be the problem solver that you are?
That's a great question. It's been a mix of things. So I think, first of all, I grew up, my parents actually, while my father did work in private sector, he spent quite a bit of his time in church, right? And church is kind of the center of people's lives from the point of view of they bring all their problems to God and sometimes via their pastor. So I ended up listening to a lot of people come to my father and listening to how my father tried to solve those problems. But as I grew older, particularly my dad's work in private sector, we moved to the Niger Delta when I was 9. And my father became responsible for managing very fraught relationships with the Niger Delta community right in the middle of the Niger Delta militancy. And he commanded quite a bit of respect from the militants because he would always find a way to solve these problems. But I would say, as I began to mature, I started to see that my mind worked slightly differently from most people, in the sense that I was happy to take a problem, complain loudly about it, but not just stop at that. I was happy
Mhm.
to propose a couple solutions to solving the problem, in the hopes that whoever was going to be in charge of that would be able to support, to help us out. And it mostly worked through multiple different iterations. It mostly worked. So I would say we spent quite a bit of time, for example, when I was in school, thinking carefully about how do you solve problems in that we were seeing live and direct in the education space. You had a group of people who had access to questions, papers, past question papers, and people who didn't. And then we had to create a marketplace to help everybody get access to those questions. And even when I was in boarding school, lots of people wanted access to contraband at the time provisions, right?
Mhm.
And my job was to figure out how to leverage a market driven solution to get people access to these limited materials at the right price, which was often very exorbitant. So I think, generally speaking, I just kind of over time built this muscle around providing market driven solutions to multiple different kinds of problems. And when I got to Waterloo, however, I think that was the first time that I was really taught about entrepreneurship in a very different kind of way, because Waterloo had a program called Velocity, which prioritized heavily entrepreneurial practice in the education that we were receiving. And so we
Mhm.
had an opportunity to see other people make it really big. And then I would say, that combined with a passion for Africa, even when I went to university in Canada, made this a natural birth for me and my entrepreneurial practice. Because realistically, what can you sell to Africans except solutions to problems?
Mm. Yeah. Or dreams of another something. I just kind of
Uh,
look at where we are now, and I guess it is a problem that we're solving, but it's not always the most pressing problem that the market is providing for sometimes.
Well, I think sometimes you sometimes will have people who want to sell aspirations and dreams, like you said.
Yeah.
But I
Mhm.
find that they don't end up becoming lasting businesses, right? The moment the
Mm. Mhm.
initial wear of the high of being considered or perceived as something wears off, people do still want to go back to real solutions to their deepest problems, making more
True.
money, earning a living, sending their child to school and getting them a decent education, you know,
True.
helping that mother or father or uncle of theirs get through that really bad ailment. That's where people's money really goes, right?
Mhm. I mean, at the base of it, yes. Yeah, that's true. I mean, survival and care for others, most definitely. So let me ask you this. You spoke a little bit about living in Canada and you're living in the Niger Delta and what have you. So let me ask you, and it probably kind of dovetails with your passion is why the where? Why have you chosen the wheres of your life to date?
Well, most times I didn't get to choose them.
Mm. Okay.
I
Mhm, mhm,
mean,
mhm.
I don't think I had much input into the decision to move to the Niger Delta.
Okay. Right,
neither,
right,
neither,
right, right.
neither did I have much to do with Canada, to be very frank, because I had expected to end up in the US.
Oh, okay.
Um, but I find myself where I find myself, and I try to make the best of it. Um,
Okay.
and and I'm not as deliberate as most people might imagine about the wares of my life. I just take the punches as they roll and come.
Interesting.
But I do recognize the privilege I have in being able to make a difference wherever I am, and it's something that really helps me kind of maintain my mindset, right? Because
Mhm.
so long as the object is achieved, so to speak, I'm a bit more flexible on the path,
Mm.
from that perspective.
Mhm. Mhm. I get it. I get it. But you made a deliberate decision to move back to Nigeria, right?
Somewhat.
Somewhat. Oh, okay. So tell us that story. So tell us why how did
Well,
you
okay,
end up
so
back?
yeah, so after Flutter Wave, I imagined I would take some time off and go away for a while, or maybe forever. I actually was, after Florida Wave, I actually planned to move to the US and live there for a couple years. I just married an American wife and
Mhm.
I had
Mhm.
a 2-year-old. And my plan was to try and live a normal life as much as I could, right?
Okay.
But
Okay.
there were just so many barriers to entrepreneurs getting into venture in Black entrepreneurs getting into venture in the Valley where I've chosen
Mhm.
to settle, right?
Mhm.
It's just really hard. It's not as simple as people like to make it seem.
That I know.
To be an
Yeah, for sure.
entrepreneur and to hope to be on the other side of the table in the Valley.
Mhm.
And I also had to do a frank evaluation of where I had the means and the respect of both entrepreneurs and a certain kind of investor class. And that was going to be in Africa. But I think the nail that eventually hit the head was when Trump basically said that Nigerians weren't going to be allowed to become permanent residents in the US. I think it was an executive order or something.
Mhm.
And,
Yep.
I just, all of a sudden, I just grew up that I was giving these Americans so much power over my life. I couldn't possibly be
Mm.
comfortable um,
Mhm.
remaining in America. So I packed my bags and my family and moved back to Lagos, where I have a bit more control, despite how mad it is.
Right. And that's one of the things that often like to kind of discuss is what the immigration challenges are when you're thinking about living abroad. And there you have it. You were building a career, built companies, were a great contributor to the global economy, and then you have this policy that kind of shuffles your world around. And it sounds like for the good because you're solving problems for the good. In your career and you're living abroad, what were some of the immigration challenges that you may have dealt with, if any?
Well, I mean, they weren't really challenges. I think I just,
Okay.
I mean, not from the point of view of I had trouble staying. I could have perhaps
Mhm.
found a way to stay, but I just, for me, I think the bigger challenges were more cultural for
Mm.
me, right? I just couldn't
Mhm.
get used to the way Black people in America were treated. I think I just had trouble with that idea.
Mhm.
And it
Yep.
wasn't something
Mhm.
that registered for me until I lived in America because I'd been in America in and out, but I was there more or less as a guest. I was really in Africa doing work and then
Right.
headquartering my company in the US. But I think I really got to see up close when I lived there for a year what it meant to live in America and,
Mhm.
police stops and, all that stuff. And I was, trouble with the bank accounts, people not believing you earned money you owned, all that stuff. And I just
Mm.
felt like, it wasn't for me. Haven't come from a country where Black people are dominant and in power and in control. It just wasn't for me. So I was never fully comfortable there.
Mhm, mhm. That speaks volumes, speaks volumes. So I think we may have hopscotched a little bit about the actual work that you do, the companies that you've been involved with. I mentioned them in the intro. Tell us more about Flutterwave because that's been in the news lately or late or earlier this year, big announcements.
Yeah,
Tell us about how you came to that space and how you built that business.
yeah. So with Flutter Wave, the big idea with Flutter Wave was we wanted to build a platform that would connect Africans and Africa itself to the global economy. And I really recognized that, there were monumental challenges to the economic interaction between Africa and the rest of the world, which directly contributed to our very low contribution to global GDP, right?
Mm,
So I think one of the only continents in the world where if you wanted to wire money, you still had to work with a correspondent bank that was domiciled elsewhere, right?
mm. Yep.
Many global services really couldn't fully understand how to accept payments in Africa and move them to the rest of the world. There are so many challenges around some of these payment issues. And I saw them firsthand when I was at Flutterwave, Andela even before then. And I
Mhm.
recognized that, even if we succeeded in developing talent, as was our mission at Andela, the talent would have a hard time being able to earn from the rest of the world if we didn't fix this payments problem. And so
Mm.
that was what the
Mhm.
vision was at Flutterwave, was to, actually make Africa and Africans the participants in the global economy by fixing the ability to send and receive payments around the world.
Got it. Got it. And you mentioned that that was a bit of a solution for the company that you had already founded, Andela. So tell us more about that. Like, so how you came up with that concept and how that evolved in the, I guess it's the ed tech. So fintech and ed tech in the ed tech space.
Yeah. So when I spent quite a bit of time in the edtech space. In fact, I had done two failed companies in the edtech space before Andela. One was called bookneto.com, which was, evolved from providing LMSs to universities to providing a platform for students to share past questions and answer them in a social learning setting, and
Hmm.
to eventually becoming a LMS for professors who wanted to teach courses independent of universities. We went through quite a bit of metamorphosis, bookneto.com, and then when I saw it wasn't working, I decided to return back home and try my hands at building a company in Nigeria where I felt I had a better network and I understood, what was going on,
Hmm.
right? Um,
Yep.
and when I got back to Nigeria, I tried my hands at helping universities to be able to accept credentials from other universities for courses they didn't have the required expertise or teaching expertise in. And that didn't go so well either, right? The regulator blocked it
Hmm.
and insisted every school must have their professors not offer the course. Now, I think at the end of the day, when the idea for Andela came through from Jeremy, who was my co-founder and still the CEO, my mindset was really simple. It was really one of, look, we have an opportunity to build something that could provide jobs, impact people's lives. So why don't we give it a shot? And that was the idea. So what we do at Andela, very simply, at least what we did at the time, was we identified some of the smartest young people on the continent. We put them through a very intensive training program for 6 months, and then we deployed them to global technology companies that needed the talent. So that was what we did at Andela.
Hmm. Hmm. A bit of an HR for the tech space in a way, like a recruiter slash
um,
trainer slash recruiter.
yeah, I would say trainer slash recruiter. Maybe there's some HR involved, but definitely not
Mhm.
intentional.
Mhm.
But I think what we did really well was to be kind of like a HR recruiter for the space, right?
Mhm.
Identify talent for the space, natural talent, train them
Mhm.
up, brush them up in
Mhm.
the concepts, and then basically build them into world class talent that can work anywhere in the world. And a lot of our talents have proven themselves to be world class all over the world.
Mhm. Nice. Nice, nice. So you train these folks, they're world class across the world, but they couldn't get paid. And so then you had to figure out how do we do this where that we can make sure that people get paid. And so the transition from going from Mandela to Flutterwave, was it seamless? Were you doing both at the same time? How were you managing your time and yourself as an entrepreneur at the time?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question, Florence. So really what happened for me was, I identified the problem of Flutterwave while I was at Andela, but at Andela, I was going to leave that year anyway.
Oh, okay.
The question was whether I was going to go to business school or whether I was going to go start a new company.
Mhm,
And at the end of the day, I decided to start a new company, or to work with Benga and Leke, who were at the helm of that new company, right?
mhm,
My
mhm,
co-founders at Flutterwave. So, I mean, what really happened was when I looked at the way the world was shaping up, and this challenge in particular was threatening the livelihoods of many of the people that we had trained, I felt like it was something that if we didn't solve it, you wouldn't really have an ecosystem, right?
mhm,
Um,
right.
so I was very motivated to solve this problem. That was my mindset, and that was what led me to taking the Florida Wave option. But I did some part-time consulting work. I also invested in Flutterwave while I was waiting.
Okay.
And then, when my last day came, I think I literally that day was on a plane to Arkansas to go work on the new company.
So it was very seamless from one to the other.
Yeah,
The work
I didn't get
continued.
a break. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So what has been your most rewarding experience in the Flutterwave? Because I think you decided to retire from the Flutterwave experience, so to speak,
Well, yeah.
right? Like
Well, I
Mhm.
was trying to retire. Now I'm working on something else. Unfortunately, unfortunately, but
Right.
that was my impression. I think Flutterwave was a very difficult problem to solve,
Okay.
not least because of the characters involved, but also I think because of the industry. Finance industry in Africa is an amazing industry, and I don't mean that lightly. It's just a very funny and amazing industry. So that's just the way it is.
Sure.
Um, it was very stressful to operate in. It's highly regulated.
Mhm.
There's so much you can do to create trouble for yourself.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so that was something we had to think about a lot.
Yeah. So how did you go about fundraising for the endeavor? So you were an investor initially and you had this idea that obviously, finance is always something that people are looking at and want to get into. But given that you were mentioning that it's highly regulated and Flutterwave is available in many countries, and obviously that means a lot of compliance in a lot of jurisdictions. So when you're fundraising for it and looking for investors, how did that play into finding fundraisers and into operationalizing as well?
Well, on the one hand, there are a lot of practical challenges with fundraising because you got to make sure your I's are dotted and your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed.
Mhm.
And you also are responsible to the regulator because you're a public interest company when you're that heavily regulated. It actually
Yes.
doesn't matter about what your shareholders think. So you
Mhm,
wanted to
mhm.
make sure you were operating in full compliance so your shareholders wouldn't be grifted if you decided to do something silly. But at the same time, to be very honest, I would say the reality of the space as well was that there was a lot of educating that you had to do.
Mm. Mhm,
Right? Because
mhm, mhm.
it was a fairly new space. People didn't really understand what was going on. So much is going on, and people don't really get it.
Yeah,
Sometimes it can be a nightmare to manage,
yeah,
if you don't know what
yeah,
you're doing.
absolutely. And,
Um,
money can be funny. That's
very,
definitely
very, very extremely funny. Extremely
Yeah,
funny. Yeah.
yeah, money can be funny. So speaking of funny, or just speaking, let me ask you what you have found to be some glocal speak that you've picked up along the way.
I mean, whenever people ask you, how is it going or hello, I think the response I really like to give is, how are you? Oh, thank God.
Oh, thank
Um,
God.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and it's actually, it's so funny across Nigerian cultures. That's like a very common response. So, like,
Ah, yes. Yes.
but with the O at the end too,
Thank God. Oh.
with
Yes, the
yeah,
O.
yeah.
Exactly.
So that
Exactly.
would be my own selection of
Glocal
local
speak.
speak. Yeah,
I've heard it, so I can relate most definitely. Most definitely. Okay, so let's fast forward or forward to the present and talk about the Future Africa Fund.
yeah,
Let's talk about how you came to, because it feels like it's a VC fund, but it
yeah.
feels like it has a little bit of an impact slash, I guess, I kind of a VC fund with the everyman kind of quality is kind of how I would describe it. How would you describe it, and how did you and your team get together to build this?
Yeah. So when we were thinking about the fund, for us it was really about high impact and high returns.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
For us, it's high impact, high returns, right? So the way we think about the world is that it's only by solving the biggest problems that you can create the biggest opportunities, right?
Right.
And those are the opportunities that end up becoming huge companies.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of our mindset,
Okay.
across the board.
Okay. So How do you determine impact?
For us, it's really a function of the problems you're solving and what kind of reach the solutions that you put forward can have.
Okay,
The more fundamental the problem and the more people that it impacts, then the bigger the need, as well as the more potential the solution has to create both impact and profits. We tend to think of both along the same lines. You know what I mean?
sure.
Um,
But when you're so I find this because a lot of my background and experience has been dealing with, the foundation world and the development world, and they use the
yeah,
word impact
yeah.
quite a bit, and the idea of being able to measure it and putting it in context is often just kind of dangling there. And so when you say high impact, high profit, in my mind, to some extent, there are sectors that lend themselves to that. So you're definitely solving for specific problems, but then it also going back to, well, what exactly is the context in which you are defining it? As you mentioned, there are different ways of looking at it. So give me an example of, one of your recent companies and how you're looking at it through that lens.
One of the things that I'm very passionate about is small business, right?
Hmm.
And the modern small business it has a communication explosion. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
there's so many platforms on which their customers want to be able to talk to them.
Hmm.
WeChat, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Instagram, Telegram, you name it,
Yeah.
right? And
Hmm.
oftentimes, I think the thought process is, look, how can we aggregate all this stuff in one place so that we can respond deliberately to all this communication that's coming to us from
Hmm.
all sides? That's a huge problem for retailers. Like they're probably missing out on, 20% of sales by simply not being able to respond quickly enough. Plus, there's an opportunity to create jobs for somebody, a customer rep, to actually go and look at all this stuff, right? In a very
Hmm.
efficient way and deal with tickets very quickly.
Hmm.
So we funded this business called OnGear, which basically does precisely that, right? There's another business we funded the other day called Lamy. And Lamy basically Lamy, Lami, and they help, insurers to leverage artificial intelligence to provide better services to the insured, right? So
Hmm.
typically it's very difficult for you to, when you're insured, you've paid your premium and you have a claim, the way that claim is managed, right, is often a disgrace and it reduces people's trust in insurance,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
absolutely critical, right? So,
Hmm.
we Lamy basically makes insurance companies respond to claims a lot faster and better, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
There are also a bunch of other companies that we've spoken to. There's a company that we backed recently that basically helps prevent counterfeit drugs by building supply chains for drugs, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
To ensure that it's possible for you to trace and retrace where drugs are coming from, right? Uh,
Hmm. Hmm. Good
there's
solution.
a digital bank for African immigrants that we backed that basically helps with remittances and mortgage payments and all these other
Mm.
stuff that your typical banks don't care about. You know what I
Mm.
mean?
Mhm,
Uh,
mhm. So when you're looking at these small businesses, so these are again kind of referencing the idea of the everyman fund. So these are small investments that you're making, right?
yeah,
And so you are the angel, so to speak.
yeah.
And so what kind of metrics are you expecting in terms of returns for this size of business?
Well, yeah. If you use the Flutterwave example, which was a
Okay.
5-year hold period, when we
Okay.
invested in 2016, we invested about $150,000, and we
Mhm.
made 100 times our money.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that just gives you a sense of how, um,
Right. The
you know,
scale of the potential upside
exactly,
of these
exactly,
solutions. Got
exactly.
it. Got it. Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. So tell us about the model. Tell us more about the model.
Yeah. So I think for us, it's a combination of two things. One is how can we support, enable African companies that are building solutions to our many challenges, right? But then
Mhm.
on the other side of it, how do we bring more Africans into venture as an asset class? In
Yes.
other parts of the world, people are happy to offer you stocks, People are happy to offer
Mhm.
you bonds to some certain extent, but then they treat, venture and hedge funds as kind of, secret. They're more secretive asset classes, right?
Yeah.
People don't want
Mhm.
other people to
Elite.
know about those opportunities. Exactly. The elite kind of keep those to themselves. So I
Mhm.
think for us, the vantage point we're taking is, what does the world look like if venture is not an elite, is not reserved for an elite, for the elite, right?
Mhm.
It's actually like, the average accredited investor can invest in venture.
Mhm.
So that's kind of more or less where we were taking it from. And so we have tons of companies that are excited about working with us from that point of view. And also individuals. We have about 270 members that are excited to work with us from that vantage point.
Okay. And so how are you finding your members? What's their demographic? Where are they coming from?
We have kind of four major demographics. One demographic is other people who work in tech, right? Another demographic is other investors in tech who want to see our deal flow. Another demographic is, people who made money in other industries but are looking at tech now as the future, want to commit some of their money into tech, right?
Mhm.
As angel investors. And then I'll say the final group, they're typically high net worth individuals or families that want to invest in tech.
Mhm. Got
So
it.
those are like the four groups.
Got it. Do you see an opportunity potentially for institutional investors at some point in the fund?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, we have pathways for institutional investors.
Okay.
And I imagine that we will manage a family of funds. So there will be funds, even thematic funds, dedicated to specific
Mm,
domain areas.
okay.
So, I mean, we do have all of that as
Okay.
part of our offering.
Okay. Okay. Got it. So I'll add a lot of that information in the show notes so people know how to become a member if they're interested,
Yeah.
and more information about the fund in general. So I want to ask you a little bit more about mindset.
Hmm.
What is your mindset hack? So this is something that you know of, something that you practice. Like, how do you get your mind hacked?
I mean, for me, very simple, right? I look at challenges as opportunities.
Okay.
I just automatically see a challenge, and in my mind, it's just, here's a fantastic opportunity
Hmm.
to build something, to solve a problem, to create impact. That numbs challenges,
Hmm. Hmm. Right.
and it keeps me
Right.
very
Right.
optimistic, right?
Sure.
So,
Sure. Sure. Sure.
that's my mind hack.
Okay. Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. So tell us something so I'd like to get a bit of a sense of who you are outside of all this work. So we talked about all the work and you've been very business
Mhm.
focused, but you're not even to midlife yet.
Yeah.
So what kinds of things occupy you outside of work?
I mean, a lot of my life outside of work, I typically spend with policy, politics, advocacy,
Hmm.
and
Mhm,
philanthropy. Quite
mhm,
frankly, that's
mhm,
that's what I
mhm.
spend most of my time out of work. So whether that's church or it's just serving the community,
Yeah.
that's what I spend quite a bit of my time outside of work doing. Yeah.
So I had a question for you as well that is somewhat along that
Hmm.
lines, but it kind of deals with work. And it is, you know, when I look at being in Africa and most of the developing world, I see infrastructure as the most significant challenge. And so, how do you see tech and your role as a tech VC potentially really solving for some of the major infrastructure challenges that we have? Maybe it is just this other thing that is part of what you do on the outside of the VC, but I can't help but always thinking, okay, so a huge part of our problems are either the logistics around providing for infrastructure, the supply chain, all those things. So how do you potentially see tech intersecting with solutions on the infrastructure side?
I mean, I see tech across all. You know what
Mhm.
I mean?
Mhm. Got it.
I see it everywhere because if you think about the continent, you
Mhm.
know what I mean.
Mhm.
What you want to do, what you realize is that we won't be able to get to scale on solutions that matter without technology. say
Mm.
you take a look at the mobile phone and how it's proliferated, it literally, if you try to do this with fixed line cables and all that stuff, it wouldn't work. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right,
So
right. We'd still
yeah,
be, missing each other and having to wait at some
yeah,
specific point to make a
exactly.
call. Mhm.
So
Got
you
it.
need, yeah, so you need technology to help scale the solutions.
Mhm. Mhm. So that's the general ethos is in any piece of the puzzle, there is a tech solution that will help move it forward.
Hmm.
Mhm. Got it. Got it. So, where are you a listener? Are you a watcher? Or are you a reader?
Oh, that's a good question. I like to read. I think I'm more of a reader.
Okay. So, what are some of
Mm.
your favorite reads?
I like to read historical documents or
Mm, okay.
autobiographies.
Mhm. Mhm.
I love historical texts quite a lot,
Okay.
especially about real people. I
Yeah. Yeah.
want to understand what their time was like,
Mhm.
especially, I mean, now I'm very, very stuck on texts and characters from the 1820s, right?
Oh, okay. Why that in
1820 to
particular?
1920.
Uh-huh.
Um, I think that's where that's the cycle of life where we are right now, especially in
Oh,
Nigeria. It's kind of
uh-huh.
like, it's like right before the Gilded Age. You know what I
Mm.
mean?
Mhm. Mhm.
So,
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
that's how I see it.
Interesting. Interesting. So, what are some of the things that you're reading in particular?
So, I've spent quite a bit of time reading The House That Morgan Built. That's one of the
Mm,
books I've
mhm.
been reading.
Huge book, yeah.
Yeah. uh,
That does take a lot of time.
that, that took a lot of time. And then, I mean, in my fiction, I have read, gone back to Gatsby and just tried to understand more of what's going
Mm,
on there.
mhm, mhm, mhm. Right, in
um,
that
yeah, but
self-exploration and understanding phase of
yeah,
life. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So more for the era than for the time.
Oh, okay. Okay, so
I just
more
wanted
about
to understand what. Yeah, I'm not really big. I just wanted to understand more about the era. What's
uh-huh,
um,
uh-huh,
you
uh-huh.
know,
Got it.
book.
So it's like you took a 200-year flashback to kind of get a sense of
Yeah,
how it is there's definitely the sense that history will always repeat itself, and
yeah,
we at the core of humanity we operate the same, but we fashion new tools, and so that's what changes is the tools that we use, but at our cores
yeah,
we generally behave the same until we
yeah,
decide not to. And
yeah,
so
yeah,
that's a key piece of, who we are now. So do
yeah.
you see us deciding to act in a different way in the next 20 years?
Maybe not. Human beings are lemmings in that way. We just tend to repeat the same mistakes again and again. But hey,
Yeah.
I'm probably not the only one reading this book, so I'm not gonna pat myself on the back and believe that I'm the only one. So given that, we'll see what happens.
Right, maybe the
But
spirit.
I'm reading. I mean, I can tell you, one of the other books I'm reading simultaneously is a book called American Disruptor,
Okay.
um,
Uh-huh.
about Leland, who's somebody I've started to learn quite a bit about. Interesting guy.
You said Norman
Um,
Lear.
Leland Stanford, right?
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah.
I should have
It's
known that. I went there.
a very. Oh, you went. Okay, awesome. Well, I mean, the man your school's named after is a scandal, and I'm always surprised that people never pick up on it. But yeah,
Yeah, it's true.
absolutely scandalous individual.
Yes, most definitely. Well,
Um,
people don't pick up on a lot of things that serve them, right? It serves to have these idolized visions of people and ways of life so that it kind of preserves the status quo in a lot of situations, and it allows for, the advancement of the power structure as it is.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
I
yeah.
mean, the thing about his story in particular is like,
Mhm.
I don't think if people imagine, say, in a country like Nigeria, for example, a worthy, quote unquote, savior or disruptor for the Nigerian state, they would be thinking of him because his story is not very innocent. You know what I mean? Like, I
Mhm.
mean, this
Mhm.
guy,
Mhm.
this guy raided the public treasury to build a transcontinental railroad.
Mhm. 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 Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. They weren't
it was
called
really
robber
so
barons for
fast.
nothing. They were not called robber
Exactly.
barons for
So
nothing. Yeah.
yeah. So I'm like, for him to have the kind of influence and be remembered kind of the way we remember him today, it says a lot about some of our preconceived notions about
Yeah. It's just, yeah, the human
about what
mind
it's gonna take to change
utterly
the country.
intriguing. Yeah, it really is. Interesting. Interesting. Wow. Well, it's been great getting to know you, getting to meet you, getting to talk a little bit about this business that we're in and changing the world. Do you have any last words to share with our listeners for today?
I mean, generally speaking, I think it's an interesting time in the world right now, and
Yeah.
and the world is looking for people who see challenges as opportunities. So yeah,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. Take a page out of your mindset hack for sure.
exactly,
For,
exactly.
for sure. I like that. I like that. I never ask my guests this, but I want to ask you, do you have any questions for me?
Oh, that's I actually don't, not now,
Okay.
but
Okay.
maybe I'll send you an email if I do later. Yeah.
No problem. No problem. No problem. All right, listeners, this has been another episode of Glocal Citizens. Thanks so much for joining us. You can always catch us each and every Tuesday with a new episode at www.glocalcitizenspod.com and wherever you get your podcasts, Google, Apple, Amazon, Verbal, Stitcher, anywhere you get your podcasts, you can find us. And tell a friend and subscribe and share. That's always very helpful. Our show notes are always really rich, and we will have rich show notes this week as well. So until next time, bye for now.